Hey there, everybody. Chris Renshaw here with Obsessive Comics Disorder, here with another D&D review for you guys. Just thought I'd try something a little different this time. So we're going to jump into this. And what is this, you might ask? This is the D&D Players Handbook. This is like I mentioned before, this is everything. And it even says so right here on the cover. Everything a player needs to create heroic characters for the world's greatest role-playing game. This is the ultimate thing. If you're looking to get into D&D, you're going to need to pick up this edition or this book. I mean, you can play without it, but you're going to want it, especially if you're a big D&D fan and all. So I'm going to kind of flip through the book and you guys can see what's all inside of here. You know, it's a hefty price tag, so no one should have to go into that without knowing what is exactly in here. First of all, I'm just going to mention that the book itself is very nice and well published. The artwork on the front, you see this lone looks like female character maybe. I can't tell race. Going up this big, huge, some frost giant looking thing. Looks really awesome. On the back, you know, you got some other who looks like maybe a hellhound, but you know, this is the pinnacle of D&D right here. Everything in this book. So let's jump inside so you can get kind of a glance at some of the pages and how it's laid out. So the book's divided up into 3 parts. And the way that parts work is part 1's right here. This is all about creating a character. This is getting started in D&D. Where do you get started? First, you got to who are you? And that's what this section's all about. So it starts off by kind of talking about how you make your characters. It gives you how that works. And then you've, of course, moved into the races. A lot of this is very standard from previous D&D editions. If you play D&D editions before, okay, it goes race and then it goes class. Well, that's exactly how it's done here. So that you should have no problems if you're coming from 3rd, 4th edition, etc. So, of course, you got your dwarves. You've got your elves. Halfling, human, dragonborn, gnome, half-elf, half-orc, and then tiefling. Tiefling, of course, being the last one. Now, a couple differences here between this and I've done the basic rules, and I've also taught the starter set. You'll know there was a lot more races in here than there was in the basic rules. That's the point. That's the reason you buy this. You know, some of those options like half-elf, half-orc. If you want to do something different beyond the basics. Now, in addition to that, there's also all this other information about the class, and not just that, but in some of these other ones, what kind of dragon or I guess dwarf is probably, or elf. Here we go. This is the best. What kind of elf are you? Are you a high elf? Are you a wood elf? Are you even a dark elf or a drow? So not only do you have all these races, but you have these sub-races within most of these more typical races. So you won't just hear, I don't want to play an elf. That's kind of boring. There's a lot of spec that you can go into figuring out what subclass you're going to be. And so once you've got that figured out, or maybe in addition to figuring that out, you're going to do your class. So here we go. We got your classes. And the classes available are Barbarian, Bard, Cleric, Druid, Fighter, Monk, Paladin, Ranger, Rogue, Sorcerer, Warlock, Wizard. So as you see, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 classes here in this book, as opposed to the 5, I believe, that are in the basic rules. So a lot more diversity in here, such as, do you want to be a magic user? Well, do you want to be a wizard, a warlock, or a sorcerer? Because all 3 of those kind of fall in that same thing. You know, do you want to be a fighter, or maybe you want to be a monk, or a paladin, or a ranger, you know, instead of being a rogue? So a lot of diversity in here. So, and even then, you flip over, you've got the barbarian, the description, kind of what a barbarian is, how do you play it. Then you've got your chart for your class 1 through 20 and what you get at each level, how your bonuses go up, what features you get as you grow, as you get older, Class-specific stuff, such as for the barbarian, it's all about rage and rage damage, and you see how that goes up over time. Then it gives you all your class features, such as your hit dice, hit points at each level, and then how much you get at other levels, what proficiencies, what weapons can your character have, what armor can they have, what kind of skills can they choose, and it just gives you a little bit of diversity there, or excuse me, not just information there. Then you go into talking about all those abilities that you get as you get more and more. They go into detail. Okay, what does that actually mean? What does rage mean? What does that mean when I activate my rage, or relentless rage, or persistent rage? What does that mean? So, and then not only that, you can pick a path for your class. Like, do you want to be for a berserker or for a barbarian? Do you want to be a berserker? All about the rage, or do you want to be a path of a totem warrior, more like a spiritual type warrior? So, and then each one of those gives you different aspects as well. And it's like that for all the different classes. You got bard, cleric, druid, like I said, fighter, all of this stuff. And this is why you buy this book. Just all this more detailed information is way more than just the 100 pages that is the basic rules. So there's a lot of stuff in here, a lot of archetypes, a lot of other spells, abilities. By the way, I'm just going to point out as we flip past this is probably one of my most favorite things right here, this wild magic surge. So what happens is, I believe this is for the sorcerer. Yes, one of the sorcerer things you can either pick Draconic Bloodline, which is kind of typical for sorcerers in the past, is their blood comes from dragon origins, or it's just like something happened to you and you got your powers through wild magic. And what happens is at specific times the GM can roll a dice, and when you cast spells, other things will happen. And this is great. This I could see this being so fun to play in a game. This wild magic surge, just like, for instance, let me just pick some random here. So the DM rolls a percentage die, and a random thing will happen. So on a 73-74, a random creature within 60 feet of you becomes poisoned for 1d4. 31 to 32, you're transported to the astral plane until the end of your next turn, after which you return to the space you were previously occupied. There's some of these, but that are really ridiculous. I don't remember which exact number. One of these turns you into a potted plant until someone breaks the pot, and then you turn back in your normal self. For the next minute, you must shout when you speak. Or you take one additional action immediately. So there's good stuff and there's bad stuff, and I love that flavor that it adds to the sorcerer character, because I do tend to play the wizards and the sorcerers. All right, so we got the classes, and then I believe next is so this is the more detailed stuff. Chapter 4 is all about your personality and background. What goes into making your name, height, weight, a lot of the more detailed stuff. Like I said, if you played D&D before, this is all very self-explanatory. You got your alignments, what language, and then this is the new stuff for D&D 5th edition. This is all background stuff. What is it about your character? What drives them? What's their traits? What bonds they have? What flaws do they have? So you can either, depending on how your DM works, you can either pick off of this list, or you can roll d6s and have those assigned to you randomly. And, for instance, flaws could be that you're inflexible in thinking, or once you pick a goal, you become obsessed with it. Maybe your personality trait is nothing can shake your optimism. So, and it's these things that, if you've heard me talk about inspiration and advantage and disadvantage, specifically inspiration, these things are what's going to drive you getting that inspiration. So when you play and really adhere to these abilities, that's what the DM's going to reward you for, because you're really playing to your character. So, and it's not just one set of tables. It's you pick a background, and within that background, there are little subsets for each of those tables that I just talked about. So, all right, now we're into equipment. Of course, you got Chapter 5 as your equipment. What kind of armor are you going to have? What kind of weapons are you going to have? So, doesn't go into too much detail, I think, about what each weapon is, but it does give you the basics of, where does each one fall, how much does it cost you, what kind of damage, and what properties does each one have. And then you've got all your other gear and items that you can get. And then, of course, it goes into background on what each of those items are. Tools, vehicles, mounts, etc. You name it. All right, customizations options. This just gives you how... there's a lot of customization in the previous pages, but say that's not good enough for you. This gives you even more options as to what's in here. You got multiclassing. Say I want to be a rogue, but I also want to heal people. So maybe I'll be a rogue paladin. That's a really weird class, but you never know how things might work. So this will give you what it costs to do that. So if I'm a rogue, I got to have a dexterity of at least 13. If I'm a paladin, I have to have at least a dexterity of 13 before I can take a rogue class as well. So this gives you all the stats for it. Feats, one of the options you can do in here, which is nothing new to people who've played is D&D in the past, is feats. It's an option. It just depends on how you and your group are. This is how this goes into all the different feats that are available in 5th edition, which each one gives you a special bonus or allows you to do something, and it modifies the game for your character in some small way. So that's all the character creation stuff. That's only 1/3 of this book. Now we get into part 2. That's playing the game. And just look at this artwork, by the way, as we're flipping through here. This just looks like a tome. I mean, I love PDFs. They're great, but there's something about having the actual book that just makes you feel like you're a spellcaster when you hold it and you're just flipping through the pages quickly, trying to find your spell. So now we're getting into the nitty-gritty details. This is just the expanded version of what is already in the basic rules, but you got your ability scores. They talk about advantage, disadvantage. So this goes into all the different roles that you'll be making, adventuring, what happens, how movement, that sort of thing. How does time pass in this world environment? Some of this information will be more for the DM than the player, but if you want to have a good idea of how your actions affect the environment, then you're going to want to read through this information, so that you don't go rushing into a cavern empty-handed. Roll some information on role-playing here. What kinds of rests? How do you get your abilities and spells back? Then we get into combat. This is probably going to be a big, especially for DMs, but players, I would advise to read this too. This is all about the combat and what happens once you've gone to that cave and once you've found that goblin, what takes over then, order, initiative, all these things. If you've been playing D&D, you've heard these terms. If you've not been playing D&D, some of these terms are going to be probably really unfamiliar to you, but as you read through, they will go through and break down a lot of this stuff for you. Movement, how you can move around things, breaking up your move, moving around creatures, all the different actions you can take on a turn, spells, dash, dodges, attacks, readying attacks. What happens when you actually make an attack? What attacks do you roll? How does it change between melee and ranged? And then, of course, you've got damage. What happens when you actually get hit? Or you hit something else? How does that damage affect you or affect it? How can you get healed? What happens when you get to 0 hit points? Does that instantly kill you or what? So death saving throws, all of that is in here. So, and then the last section of the book, probably one of the more complex parts of 5th edition, and that is the rules of magic. It's a little bit more complex in here in that it talks about spells, and then it goes into all the different spells that are available so far in 5th edition. This is the detailed breakdown this is right now we're in the Warlock spell section. Listed in alphabetical order, the spell, what it costs, or how long it takes you to do it, what kind of range does it have, what does it require you to do it, and how long does that spell last. And then, of course, it gives you a little blurb about what it actually does. And every single spell that's available is listed back here. So when you prepare your spells, if you're a warlock or a wizard, you're going to have to come back here. You're going to flip through these, see which powers you have available at the time, depending on your level, and then go through and pick, I'm going to take this spell, I'm going to take that spell, I'm going to take that spell. So this is one of the aspects of 5th edition that gets really complicated. So I'm just going to go ahead and advise you, if you're playing a magic character, you're going to want your own copy of this book. Hands down, I'm just going to say that right up front. If you're playing a magic character, you need to purchase your own copy of the 5th edition Player's Handbook, because there's nothing worse than when you're trying to do something and you got to wait for the person to your left or right to finish up looking up their spells before you can take it yourself. So trust me, you're going to want this. Or I guess worst case scenario, if you could get a hold of this and copy the pages for your reference, just these spell pages, that would be a bigger help too. But you're going to probably want them, and it's such a nice package that you might as well just get the book. All right, so once we get through here, still see this is just how many pages of spells you are, and you're going to have to flip through all of these every time you want to find a spell. Almost done. All right, A to Z. And then now we get into our appendices, and this is just even additional back information. Conditions, what kind of thing, what does it mean to be blinded? What does it mean to be paralyzed or invisible? What does that do? And how does that affect the game? Religion in the universe. What are the different gods? What are the different planes in the world? And what on each plane, what gods do they worship there? And not even that. They even talk about, they go into the Forgotten Realms and Greyhawk, Dragonlance, and even Eberron. But they even go into pantheons from human history, Celtics, Greek, Egyptians. I think Norse is in here as well. Yeah, Norse. So if you want to take some of these and affect your game as well, where you have Odin and Thor, Loki, Sif, Scotty, all of those Norse deities, you can pull those into your game as well. They've got information on them here, not an expansive amount of information. It is very brief, but it's here all waiting for you. Here's where I'll talk about, this is all the different planes of existence that are in there. How you can, there's a big, huge map of kind of the multiverse, all the different planes, inner planes, outer planes, Feywild. This is all very complicated. And I would not directly jump. This would not be for any beginner, but once you know your way around D&D, some of these terms will become more obvious. Creatures. So when this book came out, the monster manual was not available. However, I do have it as of now. There it is. That's the monster manual, and I will be doing another video on that sometime soon. But this is, if you don't have this book and you want to be able to make a game right off the bat, these are some just basic statistics of common monsters. So if you want anything that's not, or if you want something more complicated that's not in here, that's what the monster manual is all about. All right, and then the very last appendix is all about, this is kind of neat. This was very, I did not expect this to be in here, but it's very neat the way it is. This is, if you want something to inspire you in how to play your character, or, fantasy settings of how to play your character, or if you're DM and you need some ideas for your next adventure, this is just a bunch of fantasy and other books that you could read that would be very influential in helping you understand D&D. So of course we've got Tolkien and The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, the Silmarillion. You've even got Stephen King, The Eyes of the Dragon. A lot of books in here. They got let's see, I know there's anybody else. Terry Pratchett, Color Magic and the Discworld series. All a bunch of either famous books, maybe not so famous books in here, that if you want to find out more information, or, playing in a fantasy type setting, you're going to want to look through here and find books. And then obviously we finish up with the index, and then at the very end you've got your character sheet, which you use to make your character and fill it out. So that is everything inside the Player's Handbook. That is a good inside look into what's available in this 5th edition Player's Handbook. I love this book. I can't wait to break this out more and use it during an actual game. I used it briefly when I was playing the starter set, just because it was another way of having the spell listings and looking stuff up for myself. But I can't wait to use this as a player. I will say one of the big critiques that I have about the book is it's definitely written more for players coming into D&D, or players coming into 5th edition as opposed to players coming into D&D. So if you've played D&D in the past, you're going to understand pretty much everything inside this book. It's just going to be kind of the nitty-gritty details you're going to need to get in there and read. If you're brand new to D&D, not quite sure how some of this will transition. If you played RPGs in the past, you're probably going to understand it. But I don't know. As someone that's played D&D for a while, it's hard for me to rate it on that point. So I'm going to send it to you guys. Let me know if you've never played D&D and you've got it. How well was this book able to understand for you? So that's all I've got for you now this time with the D&D book. So I'm going to come back down here. Thanks, you guys, for listening to this or watching this video. Remember to subscribe for other great D&D products reviews coming soon, such as that monster manual I talked about before. Remember, you can always either comment below to talk with me or let me know what you think of the Player's Handbook. You can also follow me on Twitter. I'm at Chris the Prof, or over on Facebook, facebook.com/obsessive comics disorder. Make sure you go check out my website, ocdcast.com, for other great things such as my Boards and Swords podcast. So thanks, guys, for listening and subscribing to this video, and I will catch you next time with other great D&D stuff. Peace.